Loneliness, a human experience that transcends age and gender, often carries a particular weight for men over 50. While societal narratives frequently focus on the loneliness of women, particularly widows, the reality is that men in this age group face a unique set of challenges that can contribute to profound feelings of isolation and disconnection. This period, often marked by significant life transitions like retirement, changes in family dynamics, and the loss of peers, can create a perfect storm for loneliness to take root. Understanding the specific factors that contribute to men's loneliness after 50 is crucial for breaking down the stigma surrounding it and fostering supportive environments. The traditional roles and expectations placed upon men can significantly impact their experience of loneliness. Many men have been socialized to be self-reliant, stoic, and emotionally reserved, making it difficult to express feelings of vulnerability or seek help when struggling. This can lead to a silent suffering, where men endure loneliness without reaching out for support, further compounding the problem. The emphasis on work and providing for family can also leave men feeling lost and purposeless after retirement, disrupting established routines and social connections that once provided a sense of belonging. Retirement, while often anticipated, can be a double-edged sword for men. While it offers freedom and leisure time, it can also strip away a significant source of identity and social interaction. The camaraderie and shared purpose found in the workplace can be difficult to replace, leaving a void that contributes to feelings of isolation. Furthermore, changes in family dynamics, such as children moving away or divorce, can disrupt established support systems and leave men feeling disconnected from their loved ones. The loss of a spouse or close friends, an inevitable part of aging, can exacerbate these feelings of loneliness and grief. Beyond these life transitions, societal shifts and cultural norms can also play a role in men's loneliness after 50. The increasing emphasis on independence and self-sufficiency can make it challenging for men to admit their need for connection and support. The stigma surrounding mental health issues, particularly among men, can prevent them from seeking professional help for loneliness or related conditions like depression. Additionally, the digital age, while offering new avenues for connection, can also create a sense of disconnect for those who are less comfortable with technology or prefer face-to-face interactions. Addressing men's loneliness after 50 requires a multifaceted approach that acknowledges the unique challenges they face. It necessitates a shift in societal attitudes, encouraging men to embrace vulnerability and to seek support when needed. It calls for community-based programs that cater specifically to the interests and needs of older men, providing opportunities for social engagement and meaningful activities. Most importantly, it requires open and honest conversations about loneliness, breaking down the stigma that often prevents men from acknowledging their struggles and seeking help. Only by understanding the complexities of men's loneliness can we create a more supportive and inclusive environment for them to thrive in their later years. John, a meticulous engineer, had always defined himself by his work. For 35 years, his days were filled with blueprints, calculations, and the satisfying hum of machinery. Retirement, he thought, would be a welcome respite. He envisioned leisurely mornings, golfing with friends, and finally tackling that woodworking project he'd been putting off. The reality, however, was a stark contrast. The first few weeks were blissful. John relished the freedom from deadlines and early mornings. He played golf a couple of times. But his old buddies seemed to have their own routines now. The woodworking project, initially exciting, quickly became tedious. He found himself wandering around the house, a sense of emptiness echoing in the quiet rooms. The days stretched out endlessly. John tried to fill the time with hobbies, but nothing seemed to hold his attention for long. He missed the camaraderie of the office, the shared jokes, the sense of purpose. He missed even the annoying guy from accounting, whose constant complaining had, ironically, provided a strange sense of connection. He started eating lunch alone at the same time every day. He'd sit at the same table, reading the same newspaper. The waitresses knew his order by heart. Sometimes, he'd try to strike up a conversation, but his small talk skills were rusty. Most of the time, he just ate and left. One afternoon, John found himself staring out the window, watching the leaves fall. A wave of sadness washed over him. He realized he hadn't spoken to another human being, beyond brief exchanges with shopkeepers in days. He wasn't just bored, he was lonely. It was a strange, unfamiliar feeling, like a missing limb he never knew he had. Retirement can be a jarring transition, especially for men who have defined themselves primarily by their careers. The loss of structure, social interaction, and a sense of purpose can lead to unexpected feelings of loneliness and isolation. It's important to acknowledge these feelings and recognize that adjusting to retirement takes time and effort. It's also important to remember that it's okay to feel lost. You're not alone in this. Many men go through similar experiences, finding new ways to connect with others, whether through hobbies, volunteering, or community involvement, can be crucial for combating loneliness and building a fulfilling life after retirement. David and his wife, Susan, had always been a close-knit family. Their 2 children, now grown and pursuing their own dreams, had recently moved out. The house, once filled with laughter and the chaos of family life, suddenly felt cavernous and silent. Susan, busy with her book club and volunteer work, seemed to adjust quickly. David, however, felt a growing sense of unease. He missed the kids' late-night study sessions in the kitchen, the impromptu movie nights, even the arguments over who got the last slice of pizza. The quiet was unsettling. He'd find himself wandering into their empty rooms, touching their belongings, a wave of nostalgia washing over him. Dinners with Susan felt different. They used to be filled with lively conversation about the kids, their friends, their latest achievements. Now, the topics of conversation seemed limited. David felt a strange disconnect, as if a vital piece of their shared life had been removed. Weekends were the hardest. The house, usually buzzing with activity, felt eerily still. David tried to busy himself with yard work, but even that felt empty. He missed the days of coaching his son's baseball team, the shared excitement of game days, the camaraderie with the other dads. One Sunday, David found himself sitting alone on the patio, a half-empty glass of whiskey in his hand. He looked out at the empty swing set in the backyard, a symbol of the life that had passed. He realized he wasn't just missing his kids. He was missing the role he played in their lives, the sense of being needed, of being a father. The empty nest can be a particularly challenging time for fathers. The loss of daily interaction with children, coupled with changes in family dynamics, can trigger feelings of loneliness and a loss of purpose. It's important to acknowledge these feelings and recognize that Adjusting to this new phase of life takes time. It's also important to communicate openly with your partner about your feelings. While your experiences may differ, sharing your emotions can strengthen your bond and help you navigate this transition together. Finding new ways to connect with your children, even from a distance, and exploring new interests and activities can help fill the void left by their departure. Mark's divorce had been messy. After 25 years of marriage, his wife had left him for another man. The pain of betrayal was still raw, but even worse was the loneliness. He'd lost not just his wife, but also his best friend, his confidant, the person he shared his life with. His apartment felt cold and impersonal. It was a stark contrast to the warm family home he'd once shared. He missed the simple routines of married life, sharing breakfast, watching TV together in the evenings, even the occasional arguments. Now, he came home to an empty apartment, the silence amplifying his loneliness. He tried dating, but it felt awkward and forced. He wasn't interested in starting over. He was still grieving the loss of his marriage. He found himself comparing every woman he met to his ex-wife, a constant reminder of what he'd lost. His friends tried to include him in their social activities, but he felt like an outsider. They were all couples, and he was the single guy, the divorced dad. He felt like a fifth wheel, an anomaly. One night, Mark was sitting alone in his apartment, scrolling through old photos on his phone. He came across a picture of him and his wife on their wedding day, young and full of hope. A wave of sadness washed over him. He realized he wasn't just lonely, he was heartbroken. Divorce can be a devastating experience, leaving men feeling emotionally shattered and profoundly lonely. The loss of a long-term relationship, coupled with the pain of betrayal and the disruption of familiar routines, can create a deep sense of isolation. It's important to allow yourself time to grieve and heal. It's also important to avoid rushing into new relationships as a way to escape loneliness. Focus on rebuilding your life, rediscovering your interests, and reconnecting with friends and family. Seeking professional help, such as therapy or counseling, can be beneficial in navigating the emotional challenges of divorce and rebuilding a fulfilling life. Tom and his wife, Mary, had been inseparable for 50 years. They'd shared a lifetime of memories, from their first date to their retirement travels. When Mary passed away after a long illness, Tom's world shattered. He wasn't just grieving the loss of his wife, he was grieving the loss of his best friend, his companion, the person who made his life complete. The house felt empty without Mary's presence. Her favorite armchair sat vacant. Her knitting needles lay untouched on the coffee table. Everywhere he looked, there were reminders of her, of their life together. The silence was deafening. He missed their daily routines, sharing morning coffee, reading the newspaper together, watching their favorite TV shows in the evening. He missed her laughter, her gentle touch, her comforting presence. He missed her cooking, even when she burned the casserole. His children and grandchildren were supportive, but they had their own lives to lead. They visited often, but they couldn't fill the void left by Mary's absence. Tom felt like a part of him was missing, like he was walking through life with a piece of his heart torn out. One evening, Tom was sitting alone in the living room, looking at a photo of Mary. He smiled sadly, remembering a funny story she used to tell. He realized that even in his grief, he could still feel her love, her presence. He wasn't just lonely, he was heartbroken, but he wasn't alone. Her memory, her love, would stay with him. The loss of a spouse is one of the most profound experiences a man can face. The grief and loneliness can be overwhelming, especially after a long and loving marriage. It's important to allow yourself time to grieve and to accept the support offered by family and friends. It's also important to find healthy ways to cope with loss. Joining a support group for widows and widowers can provide a sense of community and understanding. Remembering the happy memories and cherishing the love you shared can help you navigate the grieving process and find peace. For the past 5 years, George had been the primary caregiver for his ailing mother. His days were consumed with doctor's appointments, medication schedules, and the constant demands of caring for an elderly parent. He'd given up his social life, his hobbies, even his job to dedicate himself to his mother's care. He rarely left the house, except for essential errands. His world had shrunk to the 4 walls of his mother's bedroom and the adjoining living room. He missed his friends, their weekly poker nights, their shared love of sports. He missed the simple pleasure of going out for a beer, of laughing and talking about things other than his mother's health. His mother, though grateful for his care, was often demanding and irritable. Her illness made her forgetful and sometimes even mean. George understood it wasn't her fault, but it didn't make it any easier. He felt trapped, isolated, like his life was on hold. He tried to stay positive, focusing on the importance of caring for his mother. But there were days when the loneliness was overwhelming. He felt like he was living in a bubble, cut off from the outside world. He longed for human connection, for someone to talk to, someone who understood what he was going through. His siblings offered to help, but they had their own families and commitments. They visited occasionally, but the primary responsibility fell on George. He didn't resent them. He understood. But he still felt alone. One afternoon, George was sitting by his mother's bedside, reading to her from her favorite book. She had fallen asleep, her breathing shallow. He looked at her frail figure, the woman who had once been so vibrant and full of life. He realized he wasn't just lonely. He was grieving the loss of the mother he used to know, even though she was still alive. Caring for an aging parent can be an incredibly demanding and isolating experience. The constant demands of caregiving, coupled with the emotional toll of witnessing a loved one's decline, can lead to profound loneliness and burnout. It's important to recognize the sacrifices you are making and to prioritize your own well-being. It's also important to seek support from family, friends, or respite care services. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Connecting with other caregivers, either in person or online, can provide a sense of community and understanding. Remember, taking care of yourself is not selfish. It's essential for both your well-being and your ability to provide care for your loved one. Harold had spent his life exploring the world. A travel writer, his passport was a tapestry of stamps, his memories a collection of vibrant landscapes and exotic encounters. But a sudden health scare had grounded him. His doctor's orders were clear: no more long flights, no more adventurous treks. Harold's world, once vast and boundless, suddenly shrank to the confines of his small apartment. He missed the thrill of discovering new cultures, the taste of unfamiliar foods, the conversations with people from different walks of life. He missed the sense of freedom, the feeling of being untethered. His apartment, once a temporary base between adventures, now felt like a prison. He tried to relive his travels through old photos and journals, but it only amplified his sense of loss. He felt like a bird with clipped wings, longing to soar but unable to fly. He tried to connect with other travelers online, but the virtual world couldn't replace the tangible experience of being there. He started spending more time in local cafes, observing the people around him, trying to recapture the sense of connection he used to find in foreign lands. But it wasn't the same. He felt like an observer, not a participant. One rainy afternoon, Harold was sitting in his apartment, looking out at the gray cityscape. He realized he wasn't just missing his travels. He was missing the sense of purpose they gave him. He wasn't just lonely. He felt lost. Unexpected life changes, such as health issues, can drastically alter a man's sense of identity and purpose, leading to feelings of loneliness and isolation. When a significant part of your life is taken away, it can be difficult to adjust and find new sources of meaning. It's important to acknowledge the grief associated with these changes and to explore new ways to find fulfillment. This might involve redefining your identity, discovering new passions, or finding ways to connect with others who share similar experiences. George prided himself on being a man of simpler times. He eschewed social media, preferring face-to-face interactions and handwritten letters. But as the world became increasingly digital, George found himself falling behind. His friends and family were communicating through online platforms, sharing photos and updates in the virtual world. George, stubbornly clinging to his old-fashioned ways, found himself increasingly out of the loop. He missed the casual chats, the shared jokes, the spontaneous invitations. He felt like he was missing out on important life events, like birthdays and graduations. Because he wasn't connected online, he tried to learn the basics of social media, but it felt overwhelming and confusing. He felt like an outsider, a relic of a bygone era. He tried to engage in conversations with younger people, but they spoke a language he didn't understand, a language of hashtags and memes. He felt like he was living in a different world. He started spending more time alone, reading books and watching old movies. He enjoyed these activities, but he missed the human connection, the feeling of being part of a community. One evening, George was sitting in his armchair, reading a book. He realized he hadn't spoken to a friend in weeks. He wasn't just lonely. He felt disconnected, like he was drifting further and further away from the people he cared about. While it's important to stay true to yourself, resisting technological advancements can lead to social isolation in today's world. It's not about abandoning your values. It's about adapting to the changing ways people communicate and connect. Learning the basics of social media and other digital platforms can help you stay connected with friends and family, participate in social activities, and avoid feeling left behind. It's about finding a balance between the old and the new, embracing technology without losing sight of your own identity. Arthur had always been a private person, preferring the company of his books to the company of others. But after his wife passed away, his children encouraged him to volunteer at a local charity. They thought it would be a good way for him to meet people and fill his time. Arthur reluctantly agreed, but he felt awkward and out of place. He wasn't used to interacting with so many people, especially people he didn't know. He felt like he was constantly stumbling over his words, saying the wrong thing. He missed the quiet comfort of his own home, the familiar routines that had defined his life. The other volunteers were friendly and welcoming, but Arthur felt like he didn't belong. They were all so enthusiastic and outgoing, while he was quiet and reserved. He felt like he was just going through the motions, not really connecting with anyone. He tried to find common ground with the other volunteers, but their interests seemed so different from his. They talked about their families, their travels, their hobbies. Arthur, who had spent most of his life focused on his career and his marriage, felt like he had nothing to contribute to the conversation. One day, Arthur was helping out at a food bank, packing boxes of food for needy families. He realized he wasn't just lonely. He felt disconnected from the world, like he was living in a bubble. Volunteering can be a great way to give back to the community and connect with others, but it's important to find a volunteer opportunity that aligns with your interests and personality. Forcing yourself into a situation that makes you uncomfortable can actually increase feelings of isolation and inadequacy. It's important to choose a volunteer role that allows you to use your skills and talents, and that provides opportunities for meaningful interaction with others. Don't be afraid to try different things until you find something that feels right. Robert had always been obsessed with staying in shape. He spent hours at the gym, working out religiously, meticulously tracking his diet. But as he got older, his focus on physical fitness became less about health and more about avoiding the perceived signs of aging. He was terrified of becoming old, of losing his vitality, his sense of self. He pushed himself harder and harder at the gym, ignoring the aches and pains, the warnings from his doctor. He became increasingly isolated, spending less time with his family and friends, prioritizing his workouts above everything else. His world revolved around the gym, the weights, the mirror. He felt like he was in a constant battle against time, trying to hold on to his youth, his sense of masculinity. He compared himself to younger men, constantly measuring himself against their perceived strength and vitality. He felt like he was losing, that time was winning. He became increasingly critical of his own body, obsessing over every perceived flaw, every wrinkle, every gray hair. He felt like he was losing control, that his body was betraying him. One day, Robert was working out at the gym, pushing himself to his limits. He suddenly felt a sharp pain in his chest and collapsed. He realized he wasn't just lonely, he was neglecting his overall well-being, sacrificing his health and relationships in his pursuit of an unattainable ideal. While maintaining physical fitness is important at any age, it's crucial to have a balanced approach to health and well-being. Obsessing over physical appearance and neglecting other aspects of your life can lead to isolation, injury, and a diminished quality of life. It's important to embrace aging gracefully, to accept the natural changes that occur over time. Focus on maintaining a healthy lifestyle, not just for physical appearance, but for overall physical and mental well-being. Prioritize relationships, pursue interests and hobbies, and find joy in all aspects of life, not just physical fitness. Arthur had always been a solitary soul, finding solace in his art. He spent his days painting, creating intricate landscapes that reflected his inner world. But as he got older, his isolation deepened. He rarely left his studio, preferring the company of his canvases to the company of people. He felt like he was losing touch with the outside world, that he was becoming invisible. He missed the casual conversations, the shared laughter, the sense of belonging. He tried to connect with other artists online, but the virtual world couldn't replace the human connection he craved. He felt like his art was his only companion, his only way of expressing himself. But even his art felt lonely sometimes, like it was a conversation with himself, a reflection of his own isolation. He started spending more time in local parks, observing the people around him, trying to capture their essence in his paintings. But he felt like an outsider, an observer, not a participant in their lives. One day, Arthur was sitting in his studio, surrounded by his paintings. He realized he wasn't just lonely, he was losing himself in his isolation. While solitude can be a valuable source of creativity and self-reflection, it's important to maintain a balance between solitude and social interaction. Too much isolation can lead to feelings of loneliness, disconnection, and a diminished sense of well-being. It's important to find ways to connect with others. Whether through shared interests, hobbies, or community involvement. Don't be afraid to reach out and engage with the world beyond your personal space. Remember, human connection is essential for a fulfilling life. The narratives of these men, though fictional, reflect a reality faced by many men over 50, the insidious creep of loneliness. These stories highlight the diverse triggers and manifestations of this experience, from the loss of a spouse to the challenges of retirement, the disconnect of the digital age, and the struggle to adapt to changing life circumstances. While the specific details vary, a common thread weaves through each narrative: the longing for connection, the yearning for purpose, and the quiet struggle against the isolating forces of modern life. These men aren't simply alone, they're experiencing a deeper, more complex loneliness that impacts their emotional well-being, their sense of self, and their overall quality of life. The silence surrounding men's loneliness often exacerbates the problem. Societal expectations of stoicism and self-reliance can prevent men from acknowledging their vulnerability and seeking support. The stigma associated with mental health challenges can further discourage them from reaching out, leaving them to grapple with their feelings in isolation. This silence not only perpetuates the suffering of individual men, but also obscures the broader issue, hindering efforts to address the root causes of loneliness and develop effective interventions. Breaking this silence is crucial. It requires a shift in cultural attitudes, encouraging men to embrace vulnerability and recognize that seeking help is a sign of strength, not weakness. The consequences of untreated loneliness can be significant, impacting both physical and mental health. Research has linked loneliness to an increased risk of heart disease, stroke, dementia, depression, and even premature death. It can weaken the immune system, making individuals more susceptible to illness. Beyond the physical and mental health implications, loneliness can also erode overall quality of life, diminishing happiness, motivation, and the ability to engage fully with the world. It can create a vicious cycle of isolation, making it increasingly difficult to reconnect with others and break free from the grip of loneliness. Addressing men's loneliness after 50 requires a multifaceted approach. It necessitates a shift in societal perceptions, recognizing the importance of social connection and emotional well-being throughout the lifespan. It calls for community-based initiatives that foster intergenerational connections and provide opportunities for older men to participate in meaningful activities. It requires accessible and affordable mental health services that are tailored to the specific needs of men. And, perhaps most importantly, it demands open and honest conversations about loneliness, breaking down the stigma that often prevents men from seeking help and support. Ultimately, combating men's loneliness after 50 is not just about alleviating individual suffering. It's about building a more compassionate and connected society. It's about creating a world where men feel empowered to express their vulnerability, where social connections are valued and nurtured, and where everyone has the opportunity to experience the joy and fulfillment of belonging. It's about recognizing that connection is not a luxury. It's a fundamental human need, essential for a healthy and meaningful life, regardless of age or gender.